All right, welcome to SecondBrain SuperPowers Creative Flow Workshop. I'm your co-host, Glenn Lubert, and I'm here with my colleague, Cliff Guerin. Hi, Cliff.
Hi there. Hi, Glenn. Good morning and welcome, everyone.
So we are going to start with a bit of state management, a little breath work exercise to get us in creative flow, creative group flow. So I invite you to sit firmly with your feet on the ground and upright in your chair. Put your hands on your thighs, palms down for grounding, palms up for uplifting. Just take a moment to notice your breath. Today we're going to take in a big deep breath from your belly through your nose. Then when you exhale, exhale through your mouth, but with a little bit of a hum. Maybe releasing a little nitric oxide, which helps us get the flow going. So bring it when you're ready, bring in a deep breath through your belly. Mm. One more time into your belly. Relax your shoulders and spin your neck around. When you're ready, I invite you to open up your eyes and welcome back. All right, well, so we're ready to get started, Cliff.
All right. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to walk you through the agenda for today. We're going to start with welcome and introductions. Then Glenn's going to go into the flow wave and turn it over to me after that for some thoughts on the 4C model of creativity and the maker's threshold. Then we'll take some time for questions and discussion and wrap up with a few closing thoughts. So that's our agenda for today, and we should be done by 10 a.m. Thank you. Glenn?
All right. So let's start just by talking a little bit about flow and creative flow. And if you want to unmute yourself, that would be ideal. If not, you could put in the chat. But think about a time when you were in creative flow. What did that feel like? When was that moment? Have you been in creative flow? How would you define that flow? In the zone, in the pocket, some people call it. And if for our conversation today, we're going to call it in creative flow. Think about that time. This time when things felt almost effortless and you were able to just get more work done than you thought possible. It all just came at you very quickly. Time seemed to slow down, but also speed up at the same time. Everything just was enhanced. Your senses were enhanced. Some of this, all of this might have happened, but think about a time when that was. Go ahead and enter that in the chat. The creative flow experiences. Oftentimes, this is time when you had complete focus. There was no interruptions. That's a time when you were able to do things that allowed you to get deep embodied into your work. Perhaps it was a time of day. Sometimes Sunday mornings when it's quiet, or any mornings if you get up early enough. Or a day off when you were able to do something you just really enjoyed. This is and flow doesn't have to come in creative work time, but also movement is a great way to embody flow. So getting out for a hike maybe or a walk and an epiphany came to you or an idea came to you. Another opportunity for some flow because you're out moving, and that is another way to embody that. All right, let's talk about flow as an advantage. And there's a lot of advantages to getting into flow. This is really a highly productive state. And that's really what makes this so attractive for so many people is we're able to just really knock out so much more things than we thought possible. And creativity and innovation come in this state. This is where we're reaching a state of consciousness where we're releasing neurochemicals in our brain that allows us to get to another level of creativity, make connections that we not normally wouldn't have, and that we are able to reach to feel like we're connecting to a higher purpose in this state. Our learning and memory is just through the roof, and it has a lot of side benefits for persistence and collaboration and cooperation. This is what makes flow not only so useful and productive, but also exciting and almost addictive. So this is why so many people are in pursuit of flow. And what we're going to talk about today is the flow wave, which is a framework for being able to figure out how to consistently get into flow. So lots of us are able to do it here and there and have these moments, but not really understand how to actually get there on a regular basis. Now, lots of times, obviously musicians, I said in the pocket, that's a term often used in jazz. Musicians often get into flow. That's how, especially in jazz, when they have to improvise, they have to be they're just present and things are happening without their really conscious thought. And athletes often get into flow when they're in sport and able to do things that seem almost super human because they're in this state where they're just able to have all the skills that they have acquired through time and just come to the surface when they need it on demand without any conscious thought. And that lots of times both musicians and athletes, which we can take lessons from for our creative work, are doing this because they're going through a regular routine and ritual to be able to drop into flow. And so this is really what the flow wave helps us discover, is what are our rituals and our way of going about getting into flow. It's going to be unique for everybody. And a lot of it is managing your nervous system. And this is the ability to understand when you're feeling different ways and how to how to manage that. It's looking at how do you find focus time. And I said before, focus is key part of this. Flow follows focus. So what we're trying to do is build an opportunity for focus time. And there's lots of different ways to do that. And they're going to be different for everybody's different lifestyle. And so we've made up this flow wave. We've come up with this flow wave based on some of the science behind this flow that was developed by the psychologist and scientist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And he developed a lot of this science around getting into flow based upon his years of research. And what it shows here is these 5 phases of preparing to get into and out of flow. The first phase is preparation. And this is making sure you have yourself ready for flow. This is including the basics of our physiology and our mental state. So being able to have a good night's rest, a good night's sleep, being able to have fueled ourselves properly so we have enough energy in our body on a regular basis. This is having some regular movement in our body, so we are allowing to have the energy move through our body and give us that opportunity for flow, and also having the right mindset around being able to get into flow. Having that mindset that we have a growth mindset where things are possible and not fixed. And growth mindset is really important for getting into flow. Then there's the struggle phase, and we all go through the struggle phase. This is, if you're an athlete or a musician, this is getting ready for the event or getting ready for the concert, that moment when you're going to be in flow. This is not only the practice time that you have, but on a macro level, but on the day of the event, you're going to get this actual energy, this nervous excitement energy. And that's actually helpful because it really helps you focus. It gives you that energy that you're going to need, but you can't stay in that state. And from a creative aspect, this and Cliff will go more into around this area, but this could also be getting yourself organized, getting your materials together. For people building a second brain, this is often, organizing your information, getting it all up on the screen that you need to have, and getting your environment set up and having the people know around you that, hey, I'm going to be dropping into flow. So often people say stuck in this struggle phase because they get interrupted. They get all their materials ready to go, and they're gonna get some work done, and interruption, boom, back down to the bottom of the struggle phase. Let me get back up. And this is, when we talk about multitasking and have your alerts coming on, that's why people stay stuck in the struggle phase and are not able to get into flow, because they are being interrupted not only by other people but by their environment. And your digital environment is as important as your physical environment. So this is one of the things that we really work on in our program, is how do you get through this struggle phase faster? Imposter syndrome is a key part of that, and looking at and being honest with yourself in those areas. Then there's the release phase. And this is the phase I'm most interested in right now. This is how you're getting out of struggle and going into release. And, after, say I was going to do some creative work and I got all my materials together, I was going to write an article or record a podcast, I would get all the information that I wanted to have up on my screen, review my notes, have it all basically uploaded into, short-term memory, for lack of a better metaphor there. And then I would step away from the work for a moment. And this release phase, you could do different things for this release phase, and it's up to you. This is your pre-game routine, your ritual, and things that are going to relax you just a bit, but not too far of a release. So basically, getting up and changing your perspective. Your visual perspective is another way to get a bit release. So if you're super focused, which is good, which is when you're struggle phase and you're feeling that anxiousness, getting up, standing up, doing a little bit of movement, looking out, maybe going for a bit of a walk. The humming that we did, that was a release phase. It releases a little bit of nitric oxide into your gas into your bloodstream, which dissipates some of that really hyper-focused energy that's coming in the struggle phase, and allows you to be ready to access flow. And just like going to sleep, getting into flow is not a thing you can just pull the trigger on. You just have to create all the conditions for it. And then when you're in flow, you get all the advantages that we previously talked about in the previous slide of learning and memory, motivation and productivity, the innovation and the purpose, and the collaboration and cooperation. So all of that comes when we're in this flow state. And this is where time, again, speeds up and also goes very slow for you in the state. This is why setting a timer for that is really helpful, because you can set a timer to allow you to, paradoxically, when you set a timer for time, it actually takes time out of the equation. And you're able to put that aside and say, okay, I don't have to worry about time. I set a timer. So that allows you to become even more embodied in the moment. And the timer is also important because we're releasing a whole lot of neurochemicals in your brain when you try to work into this state. And it's neurobiologically taxing on you. So you want to be able to have a recovery. A recovery is so valuable and important in this when you're doing this kind of flow work. And in general, recovery is very important. This is where the preparation stage is a recovery stage as well. You want to be able to give your body time to recover. And so after you come out of after that alarm goes off, and it's usually, I like to do 60 minutes, but it's, you could do 30-minute flow sessions, play with it. You could do a 20-minute flow session. It's, what do you have time for? Where can you get focused for? It's your playground to play with it. And then the more fun you have with it, the more you're creating the immersion time for getting into flow. And then when that alarm goes off, get up out of your chair. And again, same as the release phase, go for a walk, go do something that is pleasurable. Maybe you lie down for a short little quick nap, or just close your eyes for a moment, do some breath work like we did at the top of this session. You just give yourself some time to recover. And this time, it can be 10, 20 minutes of recovery time, and then you can go back and go into this. You can almost, when you're in a good flow state, you can almost feel the pull to stay in there. You're like, oh, but everything is good. And I'm in that moment. And that's really, the that's really the skill of being able to say, no, I need to get up, because you'll be able to, you have diminishing returns. Because if you do, then the wave comes down here further and further and lower, and that means that the curve to come back up is higher and higher and higher. So it's going to be harder to get in the flow state the next time if you stay in it. So that's the skill of trying to get out of there. And yeah, so if you have any questions as you're going through here, please put them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them. But we want to show you how this also works with your building a second brain. So if you are familiar with Tiago Forte's PARA method, and this graphic's from his website and his blog, which shows the projects, areas, resources, and archives. It's a fantastic framework for being able to get through the struggle phase faster, because overwhelm is a key problem for staying in this struggle phase. And so by allowing us to be able to use this PARA method to organize our content with the onslaught of content coming in, you're able to use this method to organize your content. So when you get in here, oh, I know what project I'm working on. Here's all the information that I want organized in there. Oh, I don't have everything in. Let me go search my note-taking app for some resources that I might need in my project. It allows this framework allows you to quickly and easily keep things more organized and on demand. So that way, when you want to get ready, when you were preparing to do your work, your creative work, you have all the resources, areas, projects, archives, all in an organized area that you can begin to put into place and put into practice before you. So you're setting the emergent state for getting into flow. Finally, I want to talk about the divergent and convergence of information. And when we talked about the PARA method, one of the things that you're doing is you're organizing information. You know, you're capturing that information, often with a great read later app. And one of the best uses for overwhelm is the read later app, where you're pushing your content when you have time to actually read it. And for me, I know for me, I had like 80-90% of the information I put into my read later app, I don't actually read, and that's a good thing. And because it's helping me deal with the overwhelm when it comes up, and that emotion that I have coming up when I have new information that I wanted to look at. And then the organize is the PARA method. So organizing that information in the right place in your note-taking app. And lots of people get stuck in this capture, organize area, and that can feel like productivity itself. But oftentimes, and in some level it is, but oftentimes it can be considered procrastination because you spend time organizing your information and capturing. I think it is fulfilling to do so. However, it's not inherently going to get you to expressing what you wanted to create. And this again is this is from Tiago Forte's Building a Second Brain program. And if you haven't taken it, I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic course. As you know, both Cliff and I were former senior mentors for that program. And the convergence, when you want to actually distill and express, that's actually the flow state that we're trying to get to. When you're in that state, you're able to really express yourself and come up with new novel ideas in this convergence. And so many people have trouble crossing this maker's threshold from divergence to convergence. And Cliff is going to talk much more detailed about the maker's threshold and how we're going to cross into it. And in our program, that's what we talk about. We talk about how to cross this maker's threshold, how to go through the struggle phase, into the release phase, and into flow. I think I was pause there. Cliff, is there anything you think I didn't cover in this that I should talk?
No, it's a great introduction. Really appreciate it, Glenn. And the one there's a few comments in the chat that is worth expanding on. I had mentioned Endel and the fact that I use Endel to help basically set the stage for a productive flow wave, in part because the soundscapes adapt to my environment, but also they adapt to the period of time that I've set for the flow work session. And Ellie mentioned that she also uses Focus at Will, which is similar. It'd be great to have you share your thoughts on using tools like Endel to help not necessarily get you into flow per se, but to help support the flow experience.
Yes, and thanks, Cliff. And those are great examples. And Brain FM is another example people have often said that they use too as well. I use Endel myself. I think it's fantastic application. It's also I use it also for sleepscapes too as well, and that also helps with the preparation stage. One of the interesting things about the Endel app is it is also helping with brainwaves, and we talk about a whole level of the flow wave that we have that includes brainwaves in here and the different brainwaves you have throughout the flow wave. And what Endel does when you put that on is not only does it take time out of the equation, which is what we want to have, we also have the opportunity to allow it to create the brainwave environment that we want to have for being best into flow. And this is called binaural beats. So one sound in one ear, one sound in another ear has a emergent quality to create a third wave in our brain that allows us to even access this flow state even more in depth. And so it's a fantastic tool. And we talk about different tools and strategies through which to build your behaviors and your habits to go through each of these stages.
Yeah. And I also would recommend Endel's power nap scenario.
Yeah.
It really is great. You wake up very refreshed.
Yeah, totally. It comes into some of the science around non-sleep deep rest, which gives you a lot, compressed ability to have really restorative mentally and physically sleep, and partly because of the brainwaves that it's able to do.
You and I have talked about also other techniques for supporting the flow experience, such as taking a walk. A couple others. Anything else you want to mention? You think would be helpful to people just as sort of handy support tools?
Yeah, I think that anytime you are doing something that is changing your perspective, and using movement will help with both the release phase, getting you out of that struggle phase, and the recovery phase. Recovery doesn't have to be laying down and resting. Recovery is just taking a break from the deep focus work you're in and giving your brain the opportunity to change its neurochemicals essentially in your brain, so that way you're able to come back into this state and replenish those neurochemicals in this recovery phase. So a walk can also be a recovery. It's not sleep recovery or rest recovery. It's mental recovery, and that's can also be active recovery. Stretching is another great one. Again, you're feel about releasing yourself from this struggle that you're in.
Yeah, I just want to add one more, which is in that release phase. Sometimes if I'm trying to write something and I just can't find, pardon me, the rhythm of the words that I want to write, during that release phase, I might put on some music that has a rhythm similar to what I'm trying to do. Jazz, if I'm trying to look for something sort of creative, or even if I'm doing something technical, it may just be a steady beat that helps me establish a sort of forward-going rhythm. And your body entrains to those rhythms. In other words, your body starts to adapt those same rhythms, and that's a great way to then start writing and just have a beat, if you will, in your head that sometimes helps unblock you if you just can't find the words, even though you know what you're trying to express.
That's fantastic, Cliff. And that reminds me, there's a dozen or so flow triggers that we explore, and these things you start to make your own, like Cliff is describing there. And one of the things that also is interesting around the music piece is that it helps with pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is a flow trigger. And so sometimes you can play the same song on repeat because it gives you that pattern recognition to be able to help drop into flow. And again, these are all these triggers we explore in our course.
Awesome.
All right, let me switch off to share for you to take over.
All right. Thank you, Glenn. So at this point, we're going to transition to the 4C model of creativity and crossing the maker's threshold. And then we're going to bring it all together at the end. So, Glenn, just to confirm, you're seeing the 4C models.
Correct. Yep. You're all good.
Thank you. So, hi, everybody. I want to begin this part of our session by reframing the idea or the concept of creativity. The term creativity is really hard to define. It comes from the English word creare, which originally meant to make grow, and later came to mean to make. And so most of us think of creativity as a capability to conceive of something original, to make something, a novel idea, an expression of an idea. But really, this whole concept is really just about 100 years old. Ancient cultures didn't actually have a word for creativity as we think of it today. The ancient Greeks, for example, believed that the artist's job was to discover the laws of nature and imitate them. Early Christian cultures had a notion of creativity, but it was essentially the sole province of God. When humans were doing creative work, making something, they're basically manifesting the ideas or word of God. It wasn't until the early Renaissance that Western culture came to believe that humans were capable of independent creative thought, but there still wasn't a name for it. So if you look at this slide, which is an engram, basically an analysis of the usage of the word creativity in the English language based on Google's analysis of over 400 million books, you can see that the word creativity only came into use in the 1920s with the introduction of psychology and this beginning to classify individual personality traits. The use of the term grew significantly in the 1950s after the Second World War with the growth of knowledge work, and really took off in the 60s with many of the cultural changes that we associate with that era. The emphasis on personal expression and personal experience, on music, art, the idea of expanding your mind, and so forth. But another important driver was the need to start making professional life, particularly traditional white-collar jobs, more attractive to people in an age of what was then growing conformity. After the 50s, it was everyone wanted to be the same, wanted to have sort of the good life. But after a few years of that, people started to get bored, and businesses realized that they had to find a new way to shape knowledge work, and that was deeply tied to the creation and development of the idea of creativity. So, what is creativity? Basically, it's the ability to transcend traditional and known ways of thinking or acting, and to develop new and original, or what we call novel ideas, methods, experiences, and projects. Creativity is a skill. It's something you can learn. It's not just a trait, something you're born with. And most importantly, it exists on a continuum. It's not a binary thing. It's not that either you're creative or you're not. Now, this idea was really developed by, basically in 2009, by the psychologists James C. Kaufman and Ronald Beghetto, who published an influential article called Beyond Big and Little, the 4C model of creativity. Prior to that, psychologists had pretty much talked about two types of creativity, either little creativity, which more or less meant amateur creativity, and then professional big creativity, which meant sort of the pro creativity or the genius level of creativity. But what Kaufman and Beghetto wanted to do is to provide a more nuanced idea of creativity that started to allow for the various types of creativity that they saw in people's development, from basically kids to the big C kind of creativity, the eminent creativity that we associate with geniuses. So let's walk through the 4C model for a moment. And I have, by the way, and you'll see in the next slide, a much more detailed analysis of this that I'm also going to, as soon as I'm done with these slides, put into the chat as a PDF so that you can have this for yourself to read later. So you don't need to take in all of this at this point. Let's start with mini-C creativity. Mini-C creativity, or interpretive creativity, is basically the beginning of the type of creativity that's a reflection of developing your curiosity, your learning, and discovery of what eventually may become your creative passions. And this is especially true for children. Basically, one of the primary satisfactions of personal creative pursuits is that you're creating for an audience of one. You are the only judge of the worth of your work. And many see creativity is essentially the playground for your creative intuitions. And for many, it's really the gateway to a creative life. Now, as we'll talk about in a moment, many of us, when you think about that struggle phase that Glenn talked about, and we'll come back to this, many of us do ourselves a great disservice by engaging in mini C type creative activities and judging ourselves by the standards of big C or eminent creativity. And we're going to come back to this. This is the importance of this model because it provides a much more nuanced understanding of what creativity is. So from mini creativity, you move on to little c creativity, which is the everyday creativity as you follow your creative passions and focus your time and attention on a specific domain. In other words, it's not, you move from sort of generalized creativity across lots of different activities to starting to want to develop skills in a specific domain, whether it's music, writing, architecture, it could be all sorts of things. So creativity at this level involves learning something about the history, customs, and quality standards of your chosen domain. And if you're building towards a career in that domain, you'll also start to need to learn what it takes, both personally and professionally, to develop the domain expertise and command of the required skills for that. So, for example, let's take architecture. If you're starting to be interested in architecture, you have to start to learn about building design and about materials and things like that. All the things that a professional architect would need to know to actually start to move ahead in his or her chosen area of architecture. You take that up a notch and you get to pro-C creativity, which is basically the expert creativity that you find for people who have a sustained passion for a field. It's basically, these are the kinds of creative achievements you get after, they typically say 10 years of work in a field to reach pro status. That's based on research that Kaufman and Megiddo did. That the pro-C creators are experts who regularly meet the standards of their profession. And participation at this level also exposes you personally and your work to the highest levels of scrutiny from other experts in the field and often from the general public. So if you think about again, let's return to the architect who's building a building, the byproduct of their work is highly visible, both to other architects and in the community, and is going to invite judgment from all sorts of people saying, I like that building, I hate it, that guy or person is a jerk, what were they thinking, or that's absolutely beautiful. And it's going to be an expression both of the form and function of the building. Many of us have walked into a building and said, it looks beautiful, but it really isn't workable on the inside. And so it's that level of scrutiny that you're opening yourself up to. And then the final category, big C creativity, or what we call eminent creativity, is the type of creativity most associated with the word, but it's also basically the breakthrough creativity or thinking that we associate with genius. And it's the result of clear-cut, eminent creative contributions that have stood the test of time. And it's very rare and, interestingly, often, in fact, usually awarded posthumously. So very few of the people we consider geniuses today were considered geniuses in their lifetime, and including, for example, Emily Dickinson, the great poet Emily Dickinson, who's a wonderful example of someone who's basically invisible, whose work was invisible in her life and today is revered. So those are the 4C, that's the 4C model of creativity. As I mentioned, I have this as a PDF, and I'm going to take a moment and put it into the chat so that you can download it. And I'm also want to, oops, what happened to my chat? You know what? I just lost my desktop there. Sorry, let me do that when I take a break. So I'm going to do that in a few minutes. And I'm also going to put a link to an article on the 4C model of creativity that I published in my newsletter and is available on my website. But I want to move on, and then I'll add these links. The other thing that I want to come back to here is this idea that as you move through these various levels of creativity, who judges, the question comes up of who judges the originality, impact, and value of your work. And basically, what you have to make sure you're doing here is you have to make sure that you are using the standards of the level of creativity that you're at. So, for example, if you see down below here, mini C creativity, we're talking, it's usually the creator is the judge. You move on to little c and you move up to the family, community, your network, and team. At pro C, it's your domain, your field, the institution you work for, the organizations that you're a member of. And big C, it's society as a whole that starts to judge your work, moving on to the world. So one of the things is that, as Glenn mentioned, when you are caught in the struggle phase, it's also because often because you're wrestling with your inner critic, that voice inside your head that delights in belittling you, criticizing you, judging you. And your inner critic can destroy your self-confidence and sometimes your career. For some, it's even an all-powerful singular presence. It's like God. And others envision it different ways, but the point is that your inner critic can be a one voice, it can be a chorus of voices, and it can keep you stuck. So when you're under the spell of inner critic, oftentimes your procrastination, your perfectionism are the byproduct of the fact that you are using the standards of a higher level of level of creativity than you should be. So basically, if you think back to the model, you're allowing your inner critics to judge your work by the standards, for example, of big C creativity, when what you're doing is little c creativity. And so you're writing against, for example, the achievements of Hemingway, or judging your visual art by the standards of a Picasso, or your music against the music of Miles Davis. You're basically applying the wrong yardstick. However, your inner critics can in fact become motivators if you try to filter out, learn to filter out all the critiques except those that help you grow to the next level of difficulty adjacent to where you are. In other words, you have to think, if you're in little c creativity and you want to get to pro C creativity, you have to say, well, what are the next steps that I need to take to get there? Not all of them, one of them, and then allow yourself to judge your work by how far it's helping you progress to that next step, but not everything all at once and not anything beyond. And then that critical voice can become a motivator, because it can help you push yourself in the way to the degree that struggle is useful in the flow wave, and you can actually help you get into flow rather than block you from flow. Glenn, I invite you to say something more just about right-sizing struggle.
Yeah, this is great. And it's a great connection to be able to understand where you are in this continuum of creativity. And I think one of the big tools to be able to do this is it's how you talk to yourself around this, and even to others, but a lot of it is around how you talk to yourself. And so I like to always go back to these magic words that we use, like right now, so far, at least. And these help with being able to compartmentalize those items. So like, oh, right now I'm working on this portion of my creativity. Right now I'm at least I've got this far along. And those are ways to rephrase the inner critic to move from inner critic's also a fixed mindset, to move from that fixed mindset to a growth mindset, allow you to open up. And this expands your creativity too as well. So it gives you more options available to you when you do that.
Yep. Thank you. So I want to quickly move on to the maker's threshold and talk a little bit about the idea of the maker's threshold and getting through the maker's threshold and how it relates to the flow wave that we've been talking about. So the maker's threshold is the term that I use to describe that transition between idea generation and idea selection. So you've probably seen this diagram many times. You saw a version of it that Glenn used a few minutes ago that from Building a Second Brain. And one of the things about it, which concerned me and why I decided to come up with this term, the maker's threshold, is that in my own creative work, I have noticed that this transition from idea generation to idea selection is not seamless. And all the diagrams, this is called the diamond diagram, not surprisingly, of creativity. And I have a whole article on the evolution of how we visualize creativity that I'll put a link to as well. So there's lots of ways it's visualized. But they don't often show a realistic description of how you go from idea generation to idea selection, that there's this threshold, this messy threshold that you have to cross. And so that's the way the term I came up with is maker's threshold, and this is the way I generally describe it. And it is perilous. It's hard to leave divergent thinking behind because divergent thinking is fun. Everything is possible. And so when you leave that state, you have to slowly start listening to your critical sensibilities, not only your inner critics, but also the demands of the project, because oftentimes there are constraints. So you have to start acknowledging those constraints. You have to choose ideas, narrow your focus, and as I mentioned, leave ideas that you're in love with behind. And so it can be difficult. And so in truth, a better visualization, and not the best, a better visualization is that the idea of moving from idea generation to idea selection is actually very messy. You don't just go through this threshold once, you traverse back through it over and over again, sometimes in a single session, certainly over the course of a project. And that it's a really, rather than being a linear process, it's actually more of an organic process because you're constantly seeing what ideas grow. They take you to the threshold. Sometimes you're able to cross and basically move ahead, and sometimes they send you right back into idea generation. Now, I have another model of this that takes us to another level of detail called the make to know model that we talk about in the course, which really helps you get a even deeper understanding of this idea of living through and working with uncertainty, which is the heart of the creative process. So let me give you an example from my own life. I write a biweekly newsletter. Oftentimes, I will start out with the newsletter with a topic, something I want to write about. I'll get into it. And even if I'm in flow and it's great, and I've got, say, a great session, and then I'll reach a point where I thought I knew where I was going, but in truth, I'm starting to doubt myself, both because the material, which could be several things, the material could not be holding up. In other words, the assumptions that I thought was going to make, the points that I thought I was going to connect, the connections may not be as strong as I thought they were, or something else may have revealed itself. And so I have to go back. And so the process of actually creating something ends up looking something more like this. This is just another example where it's a series of these sessions, each basically with its own flow wave, which may be connected in a single session. It may be a day of work, whatever. For example, I know that for myself, and I know Glenn can tell you the research supports this, about 90 minutes is the ideal period of time for me, especially if I want to work on something several times during the day. And typically those sessions are where I work on something. I move ahead, and then I reach a point where I'm not as confident, and I have to regroup, and so I have to often take a break, which we will also talk about a lot in the course, about how to manage creative flow over the course of a day or week or even a lifetime. And so this process becomes an iterative series of creative work, not a single series of creative work. And so to go back to code, the code model suggests at a very high level, and I know it's just a high level representation, but nonetheless, it makes this whole thing seem a little prettier than it really is. And so the reason why I focus on this is you are going to find that there are these messy times in your own work, and you need to understand that's not a failure on your part. It's actually built into the process. So what I want to do here is just give you a simple key to crossing the maker's threshold. And here it is. The way forward is always through the work. And in fact, I'll repeat that just because I really feel it's one of the most important gifts I can give you, which is the way forward is always through the work. You can't think your way out of uncertainty. You have to re-engage with your material, with your ideas, your process. The door opens, but sometimes you have to knock several times. So I want to also share with you a worksheet that I've developed on these ideas, which will help you understand how you express your creativity and map that against the 4C model of creativity. We're gonna send that to you in your email tomorrow, along with a link to the recording of this session. It'll help you understand what your beliefs are about your creative capacity and also your creative investments and ambitions. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to put a few links in here while we take a few moments for questions, or Glenn, if you have any follow-up comments.
Yeah, this is great, Cliff. As many times as I see this material, I always learn something new. So I feel grateful for that gift. And I think one of the things that came up to me is that this really helps this understanding of the maker's threshold and how it's a back and forth process, and not as straightforward as moving right across it, is really helpful from a perfectionist standpoint, because you recognize that you're putting something out there, and you're getting feedback to help you go back into the divergent thinking area to come up with new ideas to get back even better for the next time. And it's an iterative process. I always like to say in all behavior design, in all creativity, it's to have an experimenter's mindset, and that there is no failure. It's just more information to be able to do the next experiment and the next experiment. And our creative work is each one of those is an experiment. And that's our, a bit of a metaphor for our lives. And so that's all it is an experiment over and over. I mean, you could ask the best out there, the doing the work, whether it's podcasting or writing or writing music or anything, that when they go back and look at their earliest stuff, they're like, oh, that's cringeworthy for them. But that's the process. Every time it's just taking it back and bringing something new to the next thing you're going to create.
Thank you. I've dropped those links into the chat. And once again, we will send these out with the recording as well. Are there any questions?
Well, one thing that we definitely want to make sure to let everybody know is that our actual program is on. What is the date on that, Cliff? I forgot.
It begins May 23rd. Here, I'll share that slide. Yeah.
May 20.
SecondBrain SuperPowers begins. The spring 2023 cohort begins on May 23rd. Glenn, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and we have a discount code for everybody that has registered for this session, and it is good until when? When is the code good till? It's this Sunday.
No, till the 22nd, 21st.
21st. Okay.
Yeah.
1st to May at midnight, and the code is workshop, and it gives you 10% discount on the registration. Just go to secondbrainsuperpowers.com and use that discount code. I put it in the chat for everyone. Any final thoughts, Cliff?
Thank you, Glenn. My final thought is that Glenn and I both believe, obviously, that this combination of thinking about the flow wave and the basically process of creativity self is a very, very powerful combination. And I think that too often we think that these are separate things. We think that the flow wave is just this thing, and of course it applies to more things than just creative work. But we think that it's this thing that just doesn't necessarily apply to creative work, because there's a sort of mystery around creative work. And then when we think about the model for creative work, we think, well, this doesn't apply outside of that. But in fact, what Glenn and I are trying to do is link these two ideas to help you understand how you can basically develop not only a creative's mindset, but also a reliable workflow for yourself that reflects, your particular medium, your particular circumstances, your particular predilections about how you like to work, where you like to work, et cetera. But that we help you link up these things so that you can be creative, not just once, not just even occasionally, but on a regular basis, that you actually understand that you can create the conditions for creativity in which creativity flourishes, and you can also tweak that experience over time to get better at it. So it's a skill, and like every skill, you have to have knowledge to basically develop and apply that skill. So we want to help you build your creative skill set. That's, I think, the heart of what we're trying to do with Second Brain Superpowers. Of course, using the power of your second brain, which may be following Tiago's implementation or someone else's. The point is we have all these incredible tools that really help you offload a lot of the work that traditionally occupied your mind, making now more room for some of the kinds of things that we're talking about. So,
yeah, thank you, Cliff. That was really, really well stated, and I don't have a whole lot more to add to that, other than you say that yes, this is what getting through that struggle phase, and there's the second brain is helping you do that, and then what is this creative mystery or the flow mystery that you can really achieve to get even more creativity is not so mysterious. We can break that down for you. It's the workflows and the behaviors and protocols that you put into place for yourself, and it's really easy. It's really easy once you understand this to figure out what experiments you want to do to continue to tweak it, and it becomes fun because once you understand, oh, this is how this comes together. I can have fun to get through this and get through that struggle phase faster using your second brain tools, using some of these other tools that we talk about in the program. We're even now have all the power of artificial intelligence to be able to play with. And we delve into some of that into our program as well, too, about how you can use that to get through enhance your creativity and get through that struggle phase faster. Yeah. So we invite you to join us on May 23rd to kick off our Second Brain Superpowers program.
And learn more at secondbrainsuperpowers.com.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope you hope to see you on the 21st. 23rd. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.